What if the person who swore they loved you was quietly erasing your mind, piece by piece, making you question every achievement, every memory, until your own life no longer felt like yours? Is everything all right at work today? Anna's voice cut through the dim hum of the kitchen, where the overhead light cast long, oppressive shadows across the tiled floor, pooling like spilled ink around the edges of the room. She stood by the counter, her hands methodically slicing carrots, the knife's rhythmic thunk echoing hollowly against the cutting board, each strike a faint reminder of fragile routine. Mark lounged at the table, scrolling through his phone, his thumb flicking absently, but his eyes, those restless, shadowed eyes, darted up briefly, meeting hers with a smile that didn't quite reach the corners, leaving a chill in the air. "Yeah, just the usual grind," he replied, his tone light, almost rehearsed, as if he'd practiced it in the mirror that morning, under the harsh bathroom light that revealed too much. He set the phone down, leaning back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight like a weary sigh. The air in the house felt thicker tonight, laced with the faint, cloying scent of simmering stew from the pot on the stove, herbs and onions, a comforting ritual she'd clung to since the last argument, when she'd sworn to stitch their fraying edges back together, though the threads felt brittle now. Hope flickered in her chest, fragile as a match flame in the draft, but anxiety gnawed at its base, whispering doubts she pushed away into the gathering dusk. From the living room, Lily's laughter filtered in, sharp and uninvited, like glass shards scattering on the carpet underfoot. She was sprawled on the couch, legs tucked under her, flipping through a magazine with feigned interest, the pages rustling softly in the heavy quiet. Lily had inserted herself into their evenings more often lately. Mark's colleague from the office, he'd called her. The one who understands the pressure, her voice always carrying an undercurrent of knowing. Anna glanced toward the doorway, catching Lily's profile. Confident tilt of the chin, fingers tracing the page with deliberate slowness, as if mapping out her next move in the dim lamplight. Lily's presence was a subtle siege, her smiles laced with something possessive and cold, her questions probing just deep enough to unsettle the soul. Mark shifted, his chair scraping softly against the tile, a grating sound that lingered. "Lily staying for dinner again. Hope that's okay?" She had a rough day, boss on her case about some project we're both on. His words hung there, casual on the surface, but Anna felt the undercurrent, the way he avoided her gaze now, focusing instead on the steam rising from the pot like a veil of evasion. She nodded, forcing a smile that tasted bitter, her drive to hold the family whole overriding the knot tightening in her stomach, cold and unrelenting. Stability. Trust. That's what she needed, what she'd fight for, even as red flags waved like half-forgotten dreams in the oppressive haze. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a sharp vibration that jolted her mid-slice, the sound piercing the kitchen's muffled tension. The knife paused, hovering like a suspended threat. She wiped her hands on a towel, the fabric rough and damp against her skin, and picked it up with trembling fingers. Unknown number. The message blinked on the screen. "Ask your husband about the hotel last Thursday, room 412. She's been playing you both for months." The words blurred for a second, then sharpened, slicing through her like the blade she'd set down, cold steel against her fracturing resolve. Her breath caught, shallow and uneven, the kitchen's warmth turning cloying and suffocating, pressing in from all sides like unseen walls. Mark's laughter joined Lily's from the other room now, low and intimate, a sound that twisted the knife deeper into her chest. Anna's fingers gripped the phone, knuckles paling against the plastic, her mind fracturing along invisible lines. The perfect life she'd idealized, now cracking open to reveal the rot beneath, dark and festering. Lily appeared in the doorway, her eyes gleaming with that calculated warmth, shadows playing across her face. "Smells amazing in here, Anna. You're a lifesaver." She stepped closer, brushing Mark's shoulder as she passed him at the table, a touch too lingering, too assured in the dim light. Mark didn't pull away. Instead, he looked up at Anna, his expression expectant, hungry for her nod of approval. for the validation that kept his discontent at bay like a fragile dam. Anna's throat tightened, the air thick with unspoken weight. She slipped the phone into her pocket, the secret burning against her thigh like a hidden ember, and turned back to the carrots. But the steady thunk was gone, replaced by a tremor she couldn't hide, unease coiling through her veins like smoke, slow and suffocating in the heavy evening air. The illusion shattered, and in its place, dread bloomed, dark, unrelenting, promising abandonment in the quiet spaces between their words, where truths festered unseen. The rhythmic thunk of the knife faded into the evening's heavy silence, Anna's question hanging like a veil over the meal they shared in strained quiet. Forks scraping plates, breaths measured too carefully. Hours blurred into a restless night, the oppressive weight of unspoken doubts pressing down on her chest, each breath laced with dread that seeped into her bones. By dawn, suspicion had coiled tight in her gut, an unyielding shadow that propelled her toward the confrontation she could no longer evade. The first crack in the facade widening. "Been better, actually. That promotion I was gunning for slipped right through my fingers like smoke." Lily paused mid-slice, the carrot half severed under her knife, its orange flesh exposed like a fresh wound in the sterile light. The kitchen's fluorescent bulb buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile pallor over the linoleum counters, cluttered with half-prepped vegetables. Potatoes skinned and forgotten, their eyes staring blankly upward into the dimness. Tom sat at the scarred wooden table, hunched over a dog-eared comic book, his fork idly pushing peas around his plate, the clink of metal on ceramic the only sound breaking the thickening quiet, each note echoing faintly. She resumed chopping, slower now, each deliberate press of the blade amplifying the thunk against the board, a rhythm that mocked the tension. "Slipped away? You never mentioned chasing anything that big." Her voice carried that practiced lilt, warm yet edged, like honey laced with something sharper and hidden. She glanced at him sidelong, her eyes, dark, unblinking, searching his face for cracks in the oppressive gloom. Mark leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, the weight of his phone burning a hole in his pocket like a concealed flame. The anonymous text had arrived hours ago, stark words on a blank screen. "She's been seeing him. Weekends. The motel on Elm." His pulse hadn't steadied since, thudding dully in the heavy air. Lily, his Lily, with her endless small affections, the way she'd brush his collar straight each morning, or slip notes into his lunch, gestures now twisted, suspect under the kitchen's harsh glow. He swallowed, tasting bile rising sour. Maybe I didn't want to jinx it. Or maybe I just didn't feel like sharing every damn detail of my day. Tom's head lifted slightly, his wide eyes flicking between them, but he said nothing, just speared a pea and mashed it into oblivion on his plate, the green smear stark against the white. The boy's fingers gripped the fork tighter, knuckles paling, as if willing the moment to dissolve into the shadows. Lily set the knife down with a soft clatter that lingered, wiping her hands on a faded dish towel, the fabric absorbing the faint carrot stain like a secret swallowed whole. She turned fully to face him, her posture straightening, chin lifting in that way she did when steering conversations back to safe harbors amid the dread. "What's that supposed to mean, Mark? You've been distant all evening, snapping at the traffic on the drive home, barely touching dinner." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, a calculated curve meant to disarm in the flickering light. "If work's got you this wound up, talk to me. We fix things together, remember?" The words hung, baited hooks in the thickening air. Mark's chest tightened, the room compressing around him, thick with the scent of onions and unspoken accusations that clung like damp fog. He pulled the phone from his pocket, thumb hovering over the screen, the glow illuminating his face in cold blue, casting eerie shadows. "Fix things? Like how you fix everything, Lily? Controlling the narrative, making sure I stay in line?" His voice dropped, laced with the raw edge of doubt that had been festering since the message, slow and corrosive. I got something today. Anonymous. About you. An affair. Some guy. Motels. The knife lay abandoned, but Lily's gaze sharpened, her confidence fracturing into something colder, more predatory in the dimness. She stepped closer, voice a whisper that sliced the space between them like a hidden blade. An affair? That's what this is? Some coward's poisoned text has you turning on me? Anger flickered in her eyes, not wild, but contained, a storm building behind her calm facade, thunder rumbling low. She reached for his arm, fingers pressing just hard enough to assert, to reclaim in the oppressive quiet. You're restless, Mark. I see it. But throwing accusations? That's low, even for you. Tom shoved back from the table, chair scraping harshly against the floor, his plate rattling like fragile bones. Dad, Mom, stop. His plea was soft, swallowed by the tension, but it hung there, fragile as a thread in the gathering dark. As the family's seams began to tear, slow and inexorable, Mark met Lily's stare, suspicion coiling deeper, the dread of unraveling everything they'd built, settling like lead in his gut, heavy and unyielding. Her denial rang hollow, her touch now a chain rather than comfort, cold metal against skin. The kitchen, once their anchor, felt like a cage closing in, walls pressing nearer in the flickering light. As the knife slipped from her numb fingers, clattering against the cluttered counter in a sharp echo, Lily's gaze drifted into the shadowed corners of the kitchen, the buzz of the light now a mocking dirge, droning on. The weight of failure settled like damp rot in her bones, isolation creeping through the empty apartment's veins, slow and insidious. Evening bled into night, a slow suffocation of unspoken fears, until the ache for warmth, tainted by dread, drove her toward the door, keys heavy in her palm, the promise of tangled limbs, both salvation and snare, in the enveloping dark. Why won't you just look at me, Tom? Anna's voice cracked the kitchen's stifling hush, her words slicing through the steam rising from the pot on the stove like a faint cry. The scent of simmering onions clung to everything, her sweater, the faded curtains, the air itself, like a veil no one could shake off, thick and choking. She stood by the sink, hands gripping the edge of the porcelain, knuckles pale against the chipped rim, the cool surface grounding her tremor. The anonymous text burned in her pocket, its words replaying. Your husband's not who you think. Late nights at the office? Ask Lily. Isolation coiled in her chest, tighter than the damp dish rag twisted in her fist, squeezing the breath from her. Tom didn't turn from the table where he sat, methodically peeling an apple with a paring knife, the blade whispering against the fruit's skin in steady, unhurried strokes, curls of red flesh spiraling into a growing pile like discarded secrets. I'm looking at the dinner prep, Anna. What more do you want? His tone stayed even, a practiced calm that smoothed over cracks before they could widen into chasms. But his shoulders hunched slightly, betraying the fear he buried deep. Any ripple in their routine might unravel it all, thread by fragile thread. He glanced up once, eyes flicking past her to Lily, who had resumed chopping the carrot with deliberate, rhythmic thuds that echoed like a muffled heartbeat in the heavy air. Lily's knife paused again, hovering over the cutting board scarred from years of use, faint grooves like old wounds. She wiped her hands on her apron, the fabric stained with faint beet juice from earlier, a reddish smear like dried blood, and stepped closer to Anna. Her smile was a careful curve, affectionate yet edged, as if affection were a tool she wielded to draw others near in the dim light. Everything all right, dear? You seem distant. Lily's voice wrapped around the words, soft and insistent, pulling Anna in, even as the room pressed down with its weight. She reached out, fingers brushing Anna's arm, light, reassuring, but laced with that undercurrent of control, a shadow disguised as care in the steam-hazed air. Lily's eyes held Anna's, unblinking, feeding on the vulnerability like a quiet predator. Anna swallowed, the lump in her throat tasting of salt and unspoken accusations, bitter on her tongue. The message had fractured something fundamental, turning their perfect evenings into this. Stilted silences broken by forced normalcy, the air thick with pretense. Tom resumed peeling, his compliance a wall she couldn't breach, his fear of confrontation leaving her adrift in the oppressive gloom. But Lily was the anchor, illicit and intoxicating, a pull she couldn't resist. Heart pounding, Anna leaned into the touch, letting Lily's hand slide to her waist, hidden from Tom's averted gaze. The contact sent a shiver through her. Not warmth, but a desperate grasp against the dread pooling in her gut like cold oil. What if the message knew? What if it exposed them both? "Come here," Lily murmured, guiding Anna toward the pantry door at the kitchen's edge, away from the table's harsh light that cast accusing angles. The space was narrow, shelves crammed with canned goods and dusty jars, the air cooler and thick with the musty scent of stored spices, earthy and confining. Anna followed, her steps hesitant, pulse racing with the terror of being caught. Abandoned by Tom, rejected by the family she'd idealized, despite the cracks widening beneath. Lily pulled her close, arms encircling her in a hold that felt like possession, lips brushing her ear in the dim confines. "Forget him for a moment. We've got this, you and me." Anna's breath hitched, burying her face in Lily's shoulder, the fabric of her blouse soft against her cheek, absorbing her silent plea. The embrace deepened, bodies pressing in the dim confines, a tangle of need and secrecy that bound them tighter in the shadows. Yet fear gnawed at the edges. Lily's confidence masked something sharper, a manipulation that could turn this solace into chains, unyielding and cold. Tom's knife still scraped in the background, oblivious or willfully blind, the family's fragile peace fracturing further with every stolen heartbeat, the sound distant and mocking. That unspoken fracture lingered through the evening, the kitchen's steam giving way to the house's deepening chill, seeping through cracks in the walls. Anna moved like a ghost through the dim rooms, her hands trembling as she rifled drawers in quiet desperation, fingers brushing forgotten trinkets. Guilt coiled in her chest, heavy and unyielding, a shadow born of suspicions she'd buried too long under layers of denial. In the oppressive hush, a single overlooked scrap, tucked away like a venomous secret, began to unravel the threads of their deceit, dread seeping into every corner as resentment stirred from their graves, slow and inevitable. Tom snatched Anna's phone from the counter, the screen lighting up under his thumb like a guilty flare in the dimness. His eyes scanned the open message, the words from Mark searing into him. "Can't stop thinking about last night. When can we meet again?" The kitchen's onion-scented haze thickened around him, the pot bubbling forgotten on the stove, its steam curling like accusations in lazy spirals. Anna's face drained of color, shadows deepening under her eyes. She lunged forward, her hand outstretched, fingers clawing the air. "Tom, give that back. It's nothing." "Nothing?" Tom's voice cracked low, not a shout but a grind, like rusted gears turning after years idle in the gloom. He held the phone higher, out of reach, his arm rigid as iron. The device trembled in his grip, not from fear, but from the weight of it all. The late nights she'd claimed were work, the whispers he'd dismissed as his own doubts festering like untreated wounds. Paranoia had gnawed at him for weeks, turning every sidelong glance into evidence, every sigh into betrayal, shadows lengthening with each passing hour. Now this, concrete and cruel, shattered his careful compliance like glass underfoot. She froze, fingers curling into fists at her sides, nails biting into palms. Hope flickered in her eyes, desperate and faint, but anxiety clawed it down into darkness. "Please, Tom, we were just talking. Mark's been helping me with the stress. You know how things have been." Mark. The name hung between them, pulling the third shadow into the room like an uninvited specter. He'd been lurking in the hallway, drawn by the rising voices, his footsteps soft but inevitable on the worn linoleum, echoing faintly. Now he stepped in, leaning against the doorframe, his posture too casual, like a man testing the ice before crossing a frozen lake. Restlessness etched lines around his mouth. He'd come over unannounced again, seeking that spark Anna sometimes gave him, the validation his own hollow marriage denied in its cold silences. But his eyes darted, fear of entrapment coiling tight in his chest like a noose. "Helping?" Tom echoed, thrusting the phone toward her, the screen's light casting harsh shadows. The device glowed with more texts, timestamps mocking the family dinners they'd shared under pretense. "This isn't help, Anna. This is... God, how long? While I'm killing myself to keep us together?" Anna's breath hitched, guilt flooding her like cold water, seeping into her bones and chilling her core. She'd idealized it all, the stolen moments with Mark as escape, not destruction, ignoring the red flags waving in Tom's averted eyes, his passive retreats into silence. Now it crashed over her, the lies stacking like unpaid bills, the trust she'd sworn to rebuild crumbling under her own hands, dust in the dim air. "I didn't mean for it to... Tom, I love you, our family." "Love?" Mark interjected, pushing off the frame, his voice edged with discontent, a restless hunger breaking through like a crack in stone. He moved closer, not to defend, but to claim, his shadow falling across the sink in the flickering light. "Don't drag me into your mess, Anna. I told you this was risky." Insecurities twisted inside him, the thrill of her attention now souring into the trap he'd always dreaded. Another life closing in, unfulfilling and exposed, walls pressing nearer. Tom wheeled on him, the peacekeeper's mask fracturing into shards. "You? Get out. You've been sniffing around my wife, turning our home into your playground." Resentments boiled up, long buried. The way Mark's easy charm had always overshadowed his own quiet efforts. The family vacations soured by Mark's restless jokes, Anna's laughter tilting toward him like a betrayal. Sleepless nights replayed in Tom's mind, doubt twisting like smoke in the dark, dread settling heavier each dawn, unyielding. Anna backed against the counter, the porcelain digging into her spine like cold fingers. Tears welled, hot and unbidden, her drive to stabilize fracturing under the guilt that weighed like lead. Abandoned? She saw it now. The fracture line she'd ignored, her idealizations blinding her to the wreckage spreading slow. "Mark, stop. This isn't... Tom, I was scared, lonely, but I want us to fix this." Mark hesitated, eyes flicking to the door, his validation curdling into regret, bitter on his tongue. The room pressed in, oppressive with the scent of half-cooked meals and unspoken fractures, the air thick and stagnant. Tom dropped the phone. It clattered into the sink, water splashing faintly like a distant echo. Silence stretched, thick with the dread of what came next, nights without end, doubts that no apology could silence, shadows lengthening. Hours later, the acrid burn of overcooked onions lingered in the air like a festering wound, mirroring the resentment festering in Tom's gut, slow and poisonous. He paced the dim living room, Anna's phone a cold weight in his pocket, each tick of the clock amplifying the oppressive silence that smothered him. Sleep evaded him, replaced by a melancholic dread that twisted every memory into accusation, sharp and unrelenting. In the slow unraveling of the night, the betrayal's shadow lengthened, pulling him toward a precipice where commitment to retaliation and his own hidden desires beckoned irresistibly from the dark. The pot's contents hissed over the stove's edge, spilling a scalding froth that Anna yanked away just in time, her skin already prickling from the near miss, red and stinging. Tom's face loomed in her memory, twisted with that raw betrayal, the phone clutched like evidence in a trial she hadn't prepared for, shadows etching his features. But here she was, hours later, in the dim corner booth of the diner where Mark waited, the vinyl seats sticking to her thighs under the fluorescent buzz that hummed like distant thunder. Lily sat across from him, uninvited, her nails drumming a staccato on the laminated table. Tap, tap, like accusations building in the greasy air. Mark's eyes flicked to Anna, then away, his fingers twisting the edge of a napkin into soggy shreds, the paper tearing softly. The air smelled of grease and overbrewed coffee, thick enough to coat her throat with its bitterness. "You didn't have to come," he muttered to Lily, voice low and strained. But she leaned in closer, her perfume, a sharp floral that clawed at Anna's sinuses, invading the space between them like an unwelcome fog. "Oh, but I did," Lily said, her smile a blade wrapped in silk, glinting under the harsh lights. She glanced at Anna, appraising, as if measuring the threat in her rumpled blouse and shadowed eyes, dark hollows of fatigue. "Mark's been so distracted lately. Sleepless nights, jumping at shadows. Thought I'd check on him myself." Her words dripped with that false concern, the kind that masked the hunger beneath, her drive to reel him back, to prove she could hold him tighter than anyone else in the dim booth. But Anna saw the flicker in Lily's gaze, the fear of unworthiness lurking like a bruise beneath the surface. Anna's chest tightened, resentment coiling hot and familiar in her core. How dare Lily insert herself here, into this fragile thing she'd built with Mark, threads fraying. Tom's discovery had cracked everything open, leaving her adrift in doubt, every creak in her house a phantom footstep of abandonment echoing. Yet Mark's presence pulled at her, a reckless anchor in the storm. She reached under the table, her hand finding his knee, squeezing with a desperation that bordered on plea, skin warm against fabric. He stiffened, but didn't pull away, tension humming. "We need to talk," Anna said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her gut, words cutting the diner's hum. The diner's hum, clinking forks, muffled conversations, pressed in, amplifying the isolation of their triangle, sounds blurring into a low roar. Lily's drumming stopped, her eyes narrowing like slits in the light. "About what? Your little secrets?" Lily's laugh was brittle, laced with the shadow of her manipulations. Affection twisted into control that echoed faintly. She turned to Mark. "Tell her, darling. Tell her how you're just restless, not trapped. Not with me." Mark's breath caught, his face paling under the harsh light, shadows deepening. The weight of it all, the paranoia gnawing at him since Anna's texts had started, the dread of Lily's suspicions closing in like walls, pushed him to the edge, slow and inexorable. He met Anna's eyes, saw the anxious hope there, the idealization that ignored his own red flags, his insecurities screaming for escape into the void. Resentment surged, not at Anna, but at Lily's unyielding grip, at the life that smothered him like damp earth. This was it, the line he couldn't uncross, drawn in the dimness. "I can't do this anymore," he said, voice cracking like thin ice underfoot. He pulled his hand from Lily's reach, sliding it over Anna's instead, interlacing their fingers in a grip that sealed his choice, warm and final. "It's you, Anna, not the pretending, not the safety net." The words hung, irrevocable, as Lily's face drained of color, her confidence fracturing into something raw and rejected, eyes hollow. Anna's heart pounded, a mix of dread and illicit thrill surging through her veins. She'd crossed into this paranoia-fueled abyss, but now Mark had followed, binding them in the deepening dark that pressed close. Lily shoved back her chair, the screech slicing the air like a cry. But Mark didn't look at her. He couldn't, gaze fixed forward. The booth felt smaller, the world outside a blur of resentment-fueled resolve, their commitment forged in the ruins of what they'd shattered, ashes lingering. Hours blurred into a suffocating haze after the kitchen mishap, Anna's hands still trembling from the spill's heat and the deeper scorch of Tom's accusing glare, eyes burning in memory. Nights stretched endlessly, her mind a labyrinth of replayed betrayals, each whisper of doubt thickening the air like unseen smoke that choked. By the third evening, isolation clawed at her resolve, drawing her toward the phone once more, its secrets a looming void, pregnant with revelations that threatened to unravel her very sense of self in the quiet dark. The phone buzzed once, sharp and insistent, slicing through the dim kitchen like a blade through fog, the vibration echoing off the walls. Mark's hand froze mid-reach, the spoon he'd been stirring with slipping from his grip to clatter against the simmering pot, metal ringing. Steam curled up, carrying the acrid tang of overboiled stew. Lily's recipe. the one she'd insisted on for family night, now bitter in the air. But tonight, the word family twisted in his gut like a knot he couldn't untie, pulling tighter. Lily stood by the sink, her back to him, rinsing a knife with deliberate slowness under the running water. The water ran hot, steaming the window above, blurring the outline of the neighbor's porch light into a hazy glow. Tom lounged at the table, his chair scraped back just enough to feign casualness, but his eyes flicked to the phone on the counter. Mark's phone, the one that had been silent for hours until now, tension humming. "Pick it up," Tom said, voice flat, like he was commenting on the weather they never discussed, words hanging heavy. His fingers drummed a lazy rhythm on the scarred wood, each tap echoing Mark's pulse, erratic and loud in his ears. Tom always did this, deflected, smoothed edges, as if ignoring the cracks kept the house from crumbling under its weight. But tonight, those cracks spiderwebbed wider in the dim light. Mark snatched the device, screen glowing with a name he didn't recognize. Jay. The message preview flashed before he could swipe it away. "Missed you last night. When's round 2?" His breath caught, a hollow rasp in the heavy air thick with onions and unspoken accusations that clung like mist. Not his phone. No. Lily's spare. The one she'd left charging by the outlet. The one she'd sworn was just for work, innocent in the shadows. He turned, slow as turning in a dream where escape dissolved into walls closing in. Lily hadn't moved, but her shoulders tensed, a subtle shift that betrayed her in the steam. She dried her hands on a towel, folding it with precision. Her nails, painted that deep crimson he used to trace in stolen moments, catching the overhead light like drops of blood. "What's that look for, Mark?" Her voice was honey over gravel, confident, pulling him in even as it pushed, a lure in the gloom. She wanted control, always had, weaving her affections like threads to bind him tighter in the dark. Tom cleared his throat, the sound wet and reluctant, his drive to preserve this fragile peace, warring with the shadow of what festered beneath, unseen. "Probably nothing. Let's eat before it burns." But his eyes darted between them, compliant mask slipping, fear of the shatter he sensed coming, etched in the lines around his mouth, deepening. Mark's vision tunneled, the kitchen closing in, cabinets scarred from years of slammed doors, the clock ticking like a countdown to ruin in the heavy silence. He thrust the phone toward Lily, the screen's glow illuminating her face, unyielding and pale. "Who the hell is Jay? And don't lie, not after everything." She met his gaze, unblinking, a smile ghosting her lips like a secret she owned in the shadows. "Jealous already? You think you're the only one who gets restless?" The words landed soft, manipulative affection laced with barbs, her fear of rejection fueling the twist of the knife, slow and deliberate. She stepped closer, hand brushing his arm, but it felt possessive now, not tender, fingers like vices. "Tom knows. We've all got our ways to cope with this trap." Tom shifted, chair legs groaning against the tile like a pained breath, his passivity cracking just enough to murmur, "Lily, don't." But he didn't rise, didn't intervene, his shadow letting the poison spread. Family unit be damned, if it meant facing the storm brewing in the dimness. The revelation sank into Mark like lead, heavier than the ring on his finger back home, the one binding him to a life he'd fled into her arms for validation, now mocking. Excitement? This was just another cage, mirrored, her loyalties fracturing his illusions into shards. Despair bloomed, cold and vast, drowning the restless hunger that had driven him here, waves lapping slow. He backed away, the pot's hiss the only sound now, as the world he'd chased unraveled into doubt. Sleepless nights already clawing at the edges of his mind with icy fingers. He answered the call with trembling fingers, the voice on the other end unraveling the fragile threads of his world like frayed rope. Hours blurred into a suffocating night, the stew congealing untouched on the stove, its bitter steam a mocking echo of lost warmth, fading into chill. Days bled into weeks of hollow routines, empty chairs at the table, silenced messages, the weight of betrayal pressing like damp rot through the walls, seeping slow. Alone in the dim house, shadows lengthened, each creak whispering the inexorable crumble of all he'd held dear, piece by crumbling piece. This can't be happening. Not now, not like this. The phone's screen glows accusingly on the counter, the message from Lily stark against the dim light. Meet me tonight. Can't wait any longer. Tom's pulse hammers in his ears, drowning the soft bubble of the stew like a distant roar. He stares at it, willing the words to dissolve, but they sit there, exposed, like veins under skin pulsing. The kitchen door creaks open behind him. Anna, her footsteps hesitant on the linoleum, carrying the faint scent of her lavender soap, the one she clings to like a talisman against the dark. Tom? Her voice wavers, not quite breaking the silence, but fracturing it like thin ice. She steps closer, eyes flicking to the phone, widening. He doesn't move, can't, as if the air has thickened into tar around his limbs, trapping him. Lily's recipe mocks him from the stove, chunks of meat floating in congealed broth, the steam now a bitter haze that stings his throat with acrid bite. Anna snatches the phone before he can react, her breath catching sharp and ragged. She reads, once, twice, her face draining to the color of ash, shadows deepening. Her? Again? The words escape her like a confession she didn't want to make, her hand pressing the device to her chest as if to hide it from herself, heart pounding beneath. Tom's mouth opens, but nothing comes, only the dry click of his tongue against teeth, parched. He wants to explain, to smooth it over with the old lies, the ones that kept the peace for so long in the gloom. But the stew spits, a hot fleck landing on his wrist, and the pain jolts him silent, burning. Footsteps echo from the hall, Lily, bursting in uninvited, her coat still damp from the evening chill outside, cheeks flushed with that calculated urgency she wears like perfume, sharp and invasive. Tom, She stops, eyes narrowing on Anna, then the phone, the air shifting charged. Lily's confident mask flickers, a twitch at her mouth, the brief widening of her eyes like cracks in porcelain. She's always been the one pulling strings, affection laced with control. But now, faced with this unraveling, her poise frays at the edges. "This isn't what it looks like," she says, too quickly, stepping toward Tom, her hand reaching for his arm with feigned assurance. But her fingers hover, uncertain, the manipulator glimpsing her own rejection in the mirror of his frozen stare, cold and unyielding. Anna laughs, a hollow sound that echoes off the tiled walls, brittle and echoing. She backs away, shoulders curling inward, the anxiety she's buried surfacing in the tremble of her lips, faint. "Not what it looks like? You've been building us, on sand, Tom. And you—" She turns to Lily, voice thinning to a whisper that cuts. "You think you can just take?" The words hang, laced with the dread of abandonment she's feared all along. Her idealizations shattering like glass underfoot, shards glinting. Tom reaches for her, murmuring, "Anna, please, we can fix this, for the family." But his voice cracks, passive compliance crumbling under the weight like dry earth. Lily pulls back, her shadow self exposed in the cold glint of her eyes, defiant. "If you're choosing this mess," she hisses, "don't expect me to wait." She turns on her heel, coat swirling like a dark wing, leaving the door to slam shut behind her. A finality that reverberates through the floorboards, shaking dust. Anna doesn't follow. She sets the phone down, deliberate and slow, her gaze distant, as if already slipping away into the void. "I can't pretend anymore," she says softly, grabbing her keys from the hook with a jangle that cuts. The sound cuts deeper than any shout, metallic and final. She leaves too, the front door clicking with quiet inevitability, the house swallowing the sound into its depths. Tom stands alone, the stew forgotten, cooling into sludge on the stove. The kitchen presses in, walls too close, the silence a vast, echoing void that engulfs him. His hands empty at his sides, he sinks to the floor, the linoleum cold against his palms, seeping chill. No one comes back. The loneliness seeps in, slow and absolute, a tide pulling him under. Every breath a reminder of the family he's let fester into nothing, rot spreading unseen. The message's glow faded into night, but its poison seeped deeper, unraveling Tom's world thread by thread, slow and deliberate. Hours blurred into accusations and departures, the stew cold and forgotten on the stove, its surface skinned over. 3 days later, the house echoed with hollow silence, her things gone, the air thick with unspoken regrets that clung like dust. Alone in the oppressive quiet, he sank into the chair, the wood creaking under him, the weight of irreversible choices pressing down, dread coiling like smoke in his chest, whispering of a haunting emptiness yet to fully unfold in the dimness. That's when Tom realized the stew had boiled dry, its charred remnants clinging to the pot like accusations he couldn't scrub away, black and stubborn. The phone lay face down now, but the words from Lily burned in his mind, a secret unraveling faster than he could stitch it back, thread slipping. He turned off the burner with deliberate slowness, the click echoing in the too-quiet kitchen like a verdict, and sank onto the stool, elbows on the counter, head in hands, shadows pooling. How had it come to this? Nights stolen, lies layered like sediment, until the ground beneath him felt like shifting sand, unstable. The front door creaked open, pulling him upright with a jolt. Anna's voice sliced through first, sharp but frayed at the edges like worn cloth. "Tom? Mark's here. We need to talk." Her footsteps approached, measured, as if each one cost her something vital, echoing softly. Mark followed, his presence a shadow in the hallway light, taller, broader, but hunched now, like a man carrying an invisible weight that bowed him. Tom straightened, forcing a smile that felt like cracking porcelain under strain. "Engage," he told himself. "Address it. Don't let the family fracture further into the dark." Anna entered the kitchen, her coat still buttoned against some chill only she felt, fabric rustling. Her eyes, usually steady, darted to the phone, then away, avoiding the glow. "Dinner's ruined," she said flatly, but her voice wavered, a hairline fracture in the quiet. Mark lingered by the doorway, hands shoved deep in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the floor, shadows hiding his expression. Guilt radiated from him, thick and unspoken, the kind that begged for a fight to release it into the air. Tom stood, reaching for normalcy like a lifeline. "I got distracted. Work stuff. Let me fix something else." But Anna's hand shot out, gripping the counter's edge, knuckles whitening not from cold, but from the effort of holding herself together against the tide. "No, not tonight." Her words hung, then she turned to Mark, her voice dropping to a plea that trembled. Tell him why you're really here." Mark shifted, his defensiveness coiling like a spring in the dim light. "Anna, this isn't—" He stopped, eyes flicking to Tom, then back, uncertainty flickering. Insecurities flickered across his face, raw and unguarded. The fear of being seen as the intruder, the one who disrupted their fragile equilibrium, now teetering. "I came because she asked, because we're all pretending this works, but it doesn't. I'm tired of chasing what I thought was mine." Anna's composure splintered then, a quiet sob escaping before she could clamp it down, sound muffled. She slid to the floor, back against the cabinets, knees drawn up like a child warding off the dark that pressed close. "I just wanted us to be enough," she whispered, her drive for boundaries crumbling into the fear that had always gnawed at her. Abandonment, the slow bleed of love turning to solitude in the shadows. Tom knelt beside her, his own anxiety surging, awakening to the rot he'd let fester through his passivity, unseen. He touched her shoulder, but she flinched, the contact electric with unspoken blame, sparking. Mark watched, trapped in his own turmoil, his need for affirmation twisting into something poisonous that soured the air. "We can't keep this up," he muttered, voice thick with regret. "It's killing us all." He backed away, slipping out the door without another word, footsteps fading into the night, leaving the air thicker, the silence a void that swallowed sound whole. Tom stayed with Anna until her breathing evened, until she rose unsteadily and retreated to the bedroom, the door clicking shut like a final verdict in the hush. Alone now in the empty house, he wandered the rooms, the walls pressing in with their familiarity turned alien and cold. The clock ticked relentlessly in the living room, marking seconds into an eternity of regret, each talk a nail. He traced the path of his choices, the first hesitant message to Lily, the late nights excused as overtime, the way he'd ignored Anna's growing distance, Mark's lingering visits that blurred lines into betrayals, shadows merging. Each step had led here, to this hollow shell of a home, where fulfillment slipped through fingers like smoke, intangible. He collapsed onto the couch, the cushions sagging under him like weary bones, and stared at the ceiling's faint water stains, marks from a leak they'd never fixed, spreading slow. Hopelessness settled in his chest, heavy as lead, a dread that no awakening could pierce through the gloom. The family unit he'd feared shattering lay in ruins, not from conflict, but from the quiet erosion of truths ignored, wearing away like stone. And in the oppressive quiet, Tom wondered if any of them could ever piece it back, or if the fragments were lost forever. Hours blurred into a sleepless vigil, the kitchen's acrid haze clinging to Tom's skin, like unspoken regrets, sticky and unrelenting. Lily's message echoed in the silence, fraying his resolve thread by thread, pulling taut. Dawn crept in, gray and unrelenting, but rest offered no mercy, only the gnawing pull of his phone. Its screen a shadowed portal to buried fears lurking. With trembling fingers, he unlocked it again, unease thickening the air as notifications flickered like distant warnings, urging him toward the unraveling digital trail, step by hesitant step. The phone's glow flickered like a dying ember, pulling Mark back to that rain-slicked evening 2 years ago. Anna's laughter echoing off the diner walls, her hand squeezing his under the table, promising forever in the steam rising from their shared coffee, warm and illusory. He blinked, the memory souring as the screen lit up again with notifications. Lily's profile, unblocked now, spilling secrets he'd ignored for months, words stark. He scrolled, thumb numb against the glass, cold and slick. There they were. Anna's arm looped through Lily's at some dimly lit bar, captions blooming like bruises on the skin of night. "Nights that feel right," Anna had written under one, hearts trailing off into the void like fading echoes. Another showed them tangled in a park, Lily's head on Anna's shoulder, the timestamp mocking the stew still smoldering on the stove behind him, smoke curling. Betrayal coiled in his gut, hot and twisting, jealousy a blade he couldn't pull free, embedded deep. How long? The post dated back weeks, overlapping their last fight, when Anna had sworn she needed space, not this hidden world. The kitchen door creaked open, and Anna stepped in, her coat shedding flecks of city grime onto the linoleum like dark confetti. Lily followed, close enough that their shadows merged in the overhead light, a casual intimacy that made Mark's chest tighten like a vice. "Smells like you burned dinner again," Anna said, her voice light, practiced, but her eyes darted to the phone in his hand, flickering with unease. She forced a smile, the kind she'd worn through their early arguments, idealizing what wasn't there, red flags waving like forgotten laundry in the wind. Mark set the phone down, screen up, the images glaring like accusations in the dimness. "Who's this?" His words came out flat, defensive, guilt from his own late nights at the office bubbling up like the charred pot, acrid. He wanted to confront it all, the insecurities gnawing at him, the fear of being trapped in this hollow life where fulfillment slipped through his fingers like sand, grains falling. But Lily hovered just behind Anna, her gaze insecure, desperate, fingers twisting the strap of her bag as if rejection might shatter her into pieces. Anna's composure fractured then, a hairline crack in the mask she wore. She glanced at the phone, color draining from her face like ink bleeding, and reached for it too quickly, hand shaking. Mark, it's nothing. Just friends posting nonsense. Her voice wavered, frustration bleeding through. Her need to assert boundaries clashing with the fear of abandonment. Of him walking away and leaving her alone in the echo of their empty bed, vast and cold. She idealized this, didn't she? Pretended Lily was just a balm for the wounds he'd inflicted, ignoring how it eroded them both, slow corrosion. Lily shifted, her manipulative affection surfacing in a soft touch to Anna's elbow, light but insistent. "We should go," she murmured, eyes pleading for connection, unworthy in her own shadowed doubt, yet pulling Anna toward the door like a tether, unyielding. Mark watched, unease settling deep, a melancholic dread that pressed against his ribs like heavy stone. The air in the kitchen thickened with unspoken accusations, the stew's acrid scent clinging to everything, a reminder of how secrets boiled over, leaving only remnants too stubborn to wash away into the dark. Anna hesitated, her hand lingering on Lily's arm, warm against skin, then turned back to him. "I didn't mean for you to see it like this." The words hung, vulnerable, her eyes glistening, not with tears, but the turmoil she'd buried, the conflict of wanting more while clinging to what crumbled underfoot. Mark nodded, silent, the jealousy festering into something quieter, more oppressive. The dread of a life unraveling, thread by fragile thread in the gloom. The memory dissolved into the dim haze of his apartment, the phone still clutched in his hand, like a lifeline fraying at the edges, threads pulling. 2 years had eroded that warmth into something sharper, a gnawing suspicion that coiled in his chest, heavy as the shadows pressing against the rain-streaked windows, blurring the world outside. Desperation clawed at him in the oppressive silence, urging his thumb toward her name, a confession trembling on the brink, unspoken dread thickening the air as he hit send, the click final. The faint vibration of Mark's phone against his palm sent a jolt up his arm, like a vein pulsing with unspoken accusations. Electric. He stared at the screen, Lily's last message from weeks ago, a playful emoji, now poisoned by the cascade of notifications unblocked in a fit of masochistic curiosity, colors stark. Secrets he'd buried under excuses, late nights at the office, her girls' trips that always left her perfume-scented and distant, lingering like ghosts. His chest tightened, the air in his lungs turning thick as he thumbed the call button, heart slamming against his ribs like a trapped animal, frantic. It rang twice before she picked up. "Mark?" Lily's voice filtered through, muffled, edged with irritation rather than the warmth he'd clung to in stolen moments, now faded. In the background, the low murmur of a television, the clink of glasses, domestic sounds that twisted the knife deeper, ordinary yet piercing. "Lily, I need to see you." The words tumbled out, raw and desperate, his free hand clenching the bedsheet until the fabric bit into his skin. Rough. Guilt coiled in his gut, hot and familiar, mingling with the drive to finally name this thing between them, to pull her from the shadows of his insecurities that loomed large. "Last night, when you left so quick, it wasn't just that. I can't keep pretending. I love you. We could make this real, leave all the mess behind." Silence stretched, broken only by a rustle on her end, like fabric shifting in the quiet. Then, a sigh, heavy with exhaustion, weighing down the line. "Mark, not now. I'm busy." Her tone was flat, the affection he'd mistaken for depth now stripped bare, revealing the manipulation beneath. Affection doled out like bait, reeling him in only to keep him dangling in the void. Busy? Suspicion bloomed in his chest, cold and insidious, feeding on the dread that had simmered for months like a low flame. He pictured her there, in the house she shared with Tom, the one with the creaky porch steps, and the kitchen where they'd once brushed hands over coffee, steam rising. "Who's with you? Is it—" The line crackled as another voice cut in, closer now, laced with a forced calm that barely masked the anxiety underneath, trembling. "Mark? It's Tom." His brother-in-law's words landed like a door slamming shut, the background noise sharpening, the scrape of a chair, Lily's sharp intake of breath like a gasp. Tom, always the passive one, letting resentments fester like untreated wounds, but now awakening, his voice trembling at the edges like fragile glass. "What the hell is this about?" Mark's mouth went dry, the phone slick in his grip, sweat damp. He could see it unfolding without seeing, Lily's eyes darting away, her desperation cloaked in pleas for normalcy, terrified of rejection from the man who'd built walls around their life together, high and unyielding. Tom's fear of shattering the fragile unit they'd pretended was whole, now cracking under the weight of truths long ignored, fissures spreading. "Tom, she didn't tell you?" "Tell me what?" Tom's response sharpened, suspicion mirroring Mark's own, a shared poison seeping through the line like ink. Lily's voice murmured something indistinct, placating, but Mark caught the undercurrent, her manipulative pull, drawing Tom closer even as she discarded Mark's confession like yesterday's regret. Discarded. The illusion splintered then, sharp as glass underfoot, cutting deep. Mark's drive to find fulfillment within himself curdled into defensive fury, his insecurities roaring to life in the dark. He'd chased external affirmation in her arms, only to confront the betrayal. She was preoccupied, not with escape, but with mending the very cage he'd envied, bars intact. "It's over, isn't it?" he whispered, more to himself, the words hollow in the oppressive quiet of his bedroom, echoing. The phone slipped from his hand, the call still connected, voices overlapping in a low hum of confrontation. Lily's desperate whispers, Tom's awakening accusations, echoing the dread that now filled every corner of his unraveling world, vast and empty. The screen's glow faded into the dim room, but the weight in Mark's chest only deepened, a hollow ache twisting abandonment into fury laced with fear, burning slow. Hours blurred into sleepless vigil, his mind replaying every silenced plea, every ignored call, until the shadows pressed too close, suffocating. Dawn barely lightened the curtains when he rose, keys in hand, the drive to her door a slow unraveling of restraint, dread coiling tighter with each mile, road humming beneath. The echo of footsteps that never followed, swallowed by the dim hallway's unyielding hush, thick and still. Anna's keys slipped from her fingers, clattering against the hardwood like brittle bones snapping. She had driven here blind, rage coiling in her chest after glimpsing Tom's phone on the kitchen counter. Lily's text spilling out, unfiltered, a digital hemorrhage of late-night confessions and stolen touches, words bleeding. Abandoned. The word clawed at her throat as she straightened, eyes fixed on the living room door, cracked open just enough to reveal shadows shifting inside, elusive. Tom sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on knees, his back a rigid line against the faded upholstery, worn thin. Lily perched beside him, too close, her hand hovering near his thigh, not touching, but the intent poisoned the air like faint toxin. They hadn't heard her enter. The house, this husk of a home, muffled everything now into oppressive quiet. Anna's pulse thudded, a slow drumbeat underscoring the dread that seeped from her pores, cold and insistent, sweat beating. "Tom?" Her voice cracked the silence, low and frayed, like thread pulled too tight, ready to snap. He jolted upright, face paling as he turned, light catching hollow cheeks. Lily froze, her eyes widening. Guilt? Defiance? Anna couldn't parse it, not with the fear gnawing deeper, whispering that this was the fracture point, the moment abandonment became irrevocable, final. "Anna, what?" Tom's words tangled, his hands rising in a placating gesture that only fueled her fury, palms empty. Anxious lines etched his forehead, but there was something awakening in his gaze, a flicker of resolve battling the passivity that had let this rot fester for months, unseen in the dark. She stepped forward, the floorboards groaning under her weight like a pained sigh. "Don't. Just don't pretend. I saw the messages. Her." Anna's finger stabbed toward Lily, who shifted, crossing her arms like a shield, her insecurity twisting into a desperate pout, lips trembling. Lily's lips parted, voice soft, manipulative honey laced with plea, sweet yet cloying. It's not what you think.
We were just talking, connecting. You push him away, Anna. He needs. Needs?
Anna's laugh scraped out, hollow and bitter, the sound dying in the oppressive stillness like a gasp. She rounded on Tom, close enough to smell the faint trace of his cologne mingled with Lily's floral perfume. A betrayal etched in scent, invasive. All these years, the late nights, the work excuses. I idealized us, Tom. Ignored the distance growing like weeds. But this? You're shattering everything. Tom stood, his frame trembling not from fear alone, but from the awakening pull to engage, to salvage what his inaction had nearly destroyed, hands clenching. I was lost, okay? The family, it's cracking, and I didn't know how to fix it. Lily listened when you wouldn't. His voice rose, edged with accusation, unearthing old scars. The nights he'd begged for her attention, only to be met with her walls, her idealizations blinding her to his quiet unraveling in the shadows. Lily leaned in, her desperation blooming into shadow affection, fingers brushing his arm like a claim. See? We're all hurting. Anna, you reject vulnerability. It drives people away. The words ignited Anna's rage, a violent surge that propelled her forward like a wave. She shoved Tom's chest, not hard, but enough to stagger him back against the wall, pictures rattling in their frames with faint clinks. Hurting? You've been carving me out, piece by piece. The affairs, the lies, it's all out now. I won't be left alone in this ruin you built. Tom's eyes met hers, fear mirroring her own. The terror of the family splintering irreparably, bonds snapping. He grabbed her wrists, not to hurt, but to hold, his breath ragged and hot. Stop, please. I don't want to lose you, any of this. But Lily's presence loomed, her conflicted frustration bubbling over in a sharp whisper that cut. Then choose, Tom. Boundaries or illusions. Anna wrenched free, the room closing in, dread thickening like unseen smoke that burned her eyes. The truth exposed them all. Vulnerabilities raw, connections fraudulent, leaving only the fear of what voids would remain when the echoes faded into silence. Vast. Hours blurred into a suffocating vigil, the house's shadows lengthening like accusing fingers in the dim light. Anna's rage simmered, unchecked, as betrayal's venom seeped deeper, twisting memories into thorns that pricked. She wandered the dim rooms, each corner a ghost of shared laughter now poisoned, echoes faint. The photo on the mantel, Tom's arm around her, frozen in false bliss, drew her gaze, a fragile relic mocking her shattered trust, glass cool. Her fingers trembled, the weight of finality pressing down, dread coiling tighter in the oppressive silence that smothered. Outside, the low rumble of a delivery truck grinding gears on the street below, distant thunder. Inside, Anna's breath rasped, jagged edges scraping her throat like splintered glass, raw. She stood frozen in the hallway, keys splayed at her feet like fallen stars. The phone's glow still burned into her vision. Lily's words, intimate barbs twisting through Tom's replies, venomous. The front door hung ajar behind her, letting in the faint metallic tang of exhaust, sharp. Footsteps thudded from the living room, uneven, deliberate, boards creaking. Tom emerged first, his shirt untucked, eyes widening at the sight of her, shadows under them deep. Behind him, Mark lingered in the doorway, nursing a half-empty beer bottle, his face a mask of forced casualness that cracked under her stare, lines etching. Anna? Tom's voice cracked the silence, too soft, too rehearsed, hanging. He stepped forward, palms up like a supplicant, empty. What happened? You look... She snatched the phone from her pocket, hurling it at his chest with force. It bounced off, clattering to the floor with a sharp crack. Lily. Late nights. Can't wait to feel you again. Don't. The words clawed out, raw, her chest heaving against the suffocating weight of the walls closing in, air thick. Tom's gaze dropped to the screen, lighting up with incriminating blue. Harsh. He straightened, color draining from his face, but his shoulders squared, an awakening flicker in his anxious eyes, as if this fracture forced him to finally grip the fraying threads of their life. Taut. It's not what you think. We were just talking, working through… Liar. Anna's voice sliced low, venom pooling in her veins like dark syrup. Mark shifted, bottle forgotten.